Good insert time of day you're watching this video here, everyone. I was inspired by an urban sustainability class I am taking to talk to you about transit-oriented development. I know this isn't as related to trains and public transit as my normal videos, however, I hope that this will be the first in a run of videos relating to urban planning. Don't fret though, as normal train and public transit content will continue as it has been. First, let's define what transit-oriented development is. To quote the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, transit-oriented development, or TOD or TOD, is an approach to urban development designed to bring people, services, and activities together with quality public transport supported by walking and cycling conditions that facilitate shorter trips, better lifestyles, and more efficient use of city resources. In real terms, this means designing neighborhoods around higher order transit stops that are high density and support biking, walking, and other forms of micromobility within it, while also disincentivizing the use of cars. Higher order transit includes things like metros and regional rail. Basically, it's forms of public transport that have higher speeds and higher capacity than other forms of transit. The ITDP expands on this by defining 8 principles of TOD. The first 2 are walk and cycle, which go hand in hand. These principles say that neighborhoods should have safe, reliable, and complete walking and cycling networks. The pedestrian spaces should also be comfortable for people to use, and there should be plenty of secure bike parking. The next principle is connect. The objectives of this principle are for walking and cycling routes to be short and direct, and for them to be shorter than routes for cars. The next principle puts the transit and transit-oriented development, and that is having high capacity, fast, frequent, and reliable transit. The next principle is mix, which boils down to having mixed-use developments and having a mix of demographics and incomes living in the development. Densify means that the development should be high density, putting as many homes, jobs, and amenities within a 5-minute walk of transit as possible. Compact is related to densify in that the development should be small enough that traveling through it is convenient, which is usually accomplished through high density. The last principle is shift, which means shift people away from using cars and onto public transit. This can be done with complete streets, high parking fees, congestion charging, and reducing the supply of parking. A complete street is a street whose design accommodates other road users than cars by having protected bike lanes, dedicated transit lanes, street trees, and wide sidewalks with benches and other amenities. Congestion charging, or congestion pricing, is when you make an entire area a toll zone. Any non-exempt vehicle entering the zone must pay the fee in order to enter, which disincentivizes people from driving into the zone, especially if public transit fare is cheaper than the toll. Lower Manhattan and New York City and Central London are both good examples of congestion charge zones. Now, let's look at some examples of TOD. We'll start with an example of bad TOD, which is the development around Dunwoody Station on MARTA in Metro Atlanta. First of all, the land closest to the station is taken up by parking garages, which encourages people to use their car. Second, the developments are sprawling, with lots of very wide and high-speed roads that people and bikes have to cross to get anywhere. There is a grade-separated bike lane and sidewalk along Hammond Drive, but it crosses the street midway through at grade, without a bridge or underpass, creating a dangerous spot for cyclists and pedestrians. While the development around the station is mixed use, much of the lower floors of these buildings is taken up by parking, which is most exemplified by Park Center 1 and Park Center 2, some of the closest buildings to the station. One side of the station's catchment area is made up entirely of Perimeter Mall, which is a classic American mall with a sprawling, low-density floor plan and parking on all sides. MARTA did install a new entrance at the south end of the station to directly serve Park Center, which is a plus, but it pales in comparison to all the negative things with this development. As for transit, the station itself is served by the Red Line, which runs every 10 to 20 minutes depending on time of day. For buses, note that the routes on screen are for the next-gen bus network, which takes effect in April. There really isn't much to speak of. There's a handful of routes, but they don't run frequently, and as such are not that useful as transit links. Next is an example of mediocre TOD, which can be found adjacent to the Du Quartier station, pardon my pronunciation, on the Montreal REM. The biggest downside to this development is the fact that the station is located in the middle of a large highway and located right next to a large highway interchange. In order to access the development on either side of the highway, you have to cross a long bridge. On one side of the highway is a large open-air shopping mall that is fairly pedestrian-friendly. Unfortunately, you have to cross a large and high-speed road in order to access this development. On the other side of the highway is an actual transit-oriented development with a large plaza and wide pedestrian-friendly roads running through it. The development isn't very large, however, and isn't the highest of densities. There isn't a whole lot of bike infrastructure in the area, and the space outside of the shopping mall and TOD district are very car-centric. The shopping mall side's entrance is located right next to a large parking lot, which people have to walk around, albeit in a dedicated pedestrian walkway, to get to the shopping mall. There are numerous bus routes running through the area operated by the RTL, the local bus operator. This, plus, is reduced in size by the fact that there are no bus lanes and bus stops are all located along wide and fast roads. None of the bus stops are located right next to the station's entrances either. The REM service at the station runs every 5 to 10 minutes depending on time of day. Next up is an example of good TOD. I'm talking about the Hudson Yards development in the Hudson Yards neighborhood of Manhattan. The development was built in proximity to the 34th Street Hudson Yards station on the IRT Flushing line served by the 7 train. This is by far the highest density of the TOD we've discussed so far, which makes sense considering it is in Manhattan, with numerous super tall skyscrapers. The development is partially a redevelopment of existing buildings and partially building new buildings on a cap built over the Long Island Railroad's West Side Yard, located just west of Penn Station. In addition to the subway connection, the development is also served by the M34 Select bus service, which is a BRT light line running crosstown on 34th Street with dedicated bus lanes, off-board fare payment, and camera-based bus lane enforcement. There are a handful of other bus routes running north-south through the area as well. Another huge piece of infrastructure located at the development is the High Line, which is a linear park built on an old rail viaduct. This provides a grade-separated pedestrian way from 34th Street to Gansevoort Street. Sidewalks in the area are wide and have bollards to prevent cars from encroaching at points. There are wide roads running through the area, but they have lower top speeds due to being in the middle of a very large city. There's a large public plaza in the middle of the development, which is where the main entrance to the subway station is located. The buildings in the area are a mix of uses, including some affordable housing units, which is great to see. The blocks are also small, as they are constrained by the original Manhattan grid. The development is a fairly short walk from Penn Station, where Amtrak, LRRR, and New Jersey Transit trains to areas all over the New York metro area and beyond can be taken. Penn Station is also the location of 2 more subway stations, one on the IND 8th Avenue line serving the A, C, and E, and one on the IRT Broadway 7th Avenue line serving the 1, 2, and 3. Now we'll move on to London for an example of historic TOD. That is Golders Green, located around the station of the same name on the Edgware branch of the Northern Line. Before the station opened in 1907, the area was more or less a rural village located far outside of London's sphere of influence. The Charing Cross, Euston, and Hampstead Railway, better known as the Hampstead Tube, under the direction of Charles Tyson Yerkes, decided to end their line here. The Hampstead Tube entered the line in the middle of nowhere, knowing that their new line would spur development and therefore generate traffic and money for their railway. Later, a bus station was even built right outside the main entrance. The density of the development is much lower than modern TOD, and it doesn't have all the features of the ITDP's checklist, but it is an interesting example of how the concept of TOD has been around for over 100 years, even if it hasn't always been called that. For more information on the development of the area, I highly recommend checking out Jago Hazard's video on the station, which I'll link to in the description and as a card in the top right corner. Before we move on to my last example, I'd like to take a moment to shamelessly plug my Patreon and YouTube memberships. If you like the content you see here and want to support the channel further, consider joining on either platform. You'll gain access to extra content that doesn't make it onto the main channel, such as bonus footage, behind-the-scenes videos, and more. Now, back to the TOD. Our last example is Canary Wharf, located on the Isle of Dogs in Tower Hamlets in the London Docklands. The area where the development now sits used to be part of the Port of London, as the name London Docklands would imply. However, following containerization in the 1960s, ships became too large for the Port of London to handle, and the docks started closing down. Different groups then had the idea to redevelop the Docklands, with the biggest proposal being Canary Wharf, which was to be, and now is, a second potential business district for London. From the beginning, the development is an example of what I will call development-oriented transit, as the idea for the development came first, followed by transit proposals which ultimately became the Docklands Light Railway, which utilizes abandoned railway infrastructure for much of its route to save on construction costs. It turned out that a light metro wasn't enough to cope with the huge traffic generated by the development, so the Jubilee Line extension was built through the area. This still wasn't enough, so the Elizabeth Line was also built through the area, which seems to have managed crowding levels enough. There were also numerous bus routes running through the area for more local trips. Canary Wharf, the DLR station, has unsurprisingly become one of the most important stations on the network. Unfortunately, all 3 stations, DLR, Jubilee Line, and Elizabeth Line, are not directly connected, requiring people changing trains to walk along the streets. The last thing I want to mention here is the Heron Keys DLR station, located one stop south of Canary Wharf. This station is interesting as it was rebuilt to be located inside of a high-rise building. It doesn't get more transit-oriented than that. If you want to learn more about the development of Canary Wharf and the Docklands, you can check out Jago Hazard's channel, which has many videos about this subject. That's my look into transit-oriented development. This is a fascinating urban planning area that I hope more areas around the world start to implement, along with the introduction of more higher-order transit. I want to thank my professor for giving me the inspiration to make this video when he covered this topic in class. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.